Rain poured down like a raging storm the day Ethan betrayed me. When he walked through the door, a strand of Vanessa's curled hair was still tangled around his fingers. "You will never learn how to be as passionate and charming as she is," he slurred as he pushed me away. I quietly wiped the lipstick stain from the collar of his shirt. Later, I awkwardly tried to seduce him in a cheap lace nightgown, only for him to turn away in disgust and sneer that I was merely copying someone else badly. Later still, I cried as I begged my mother-in-law to control her son, telling her that Vanessa was pregnant again. When Margaret brought people to Vanessa's apartment and forced the door open, Ethan was wearing that same lace nightgown. On television, the news was reporting that he had been arrested for embezzling company funds. The rain struck the windows like a mad drummer beating against a gigantic drum. Outside, the world was distorted by the heavy curtain of rain, while the neon lights blurred into patches of cold, wet colors. I curled up in the corner of the living room sofa, holding a hot water bottle that had long since gone cold, my fingertips unconsciously tracing the cold surface of my glass. The clock on the wall ticked heavily, each second sounding like a footstep against my already strained nerves. Ethan had told me that there was an emergency meeting at his department tonight, and that he would be home late. The lock clicked softly as the key turned, breaking through the oppressive silence created by the rain and the ticking clock. A strong mixture of smoke, alcohol, and an overly sweet unfamiliar perfume suddenly filled the room, like the sickly scent of some tropical fruit beginning to rot. My heart sank without warning, plunging into an icy abyss. He staggered inside, his expensive leather shoes leaving 2 muddy trails across the entryway tiles. His coat hung carelessly over one arm, while a large dark stain covered the front of his suit. I could not tell whether it was wine or something else. He lowered his head and seemed to struggle with his cufflinks. Then, when he raised his hand to rub his temple, I saw it. Something was tangled round his fingers. It was not dust or a loose thread. It was a long strand of dark chestnut hair with obvious curls from a styling iron. It was soft and unmistakable, like a malicious snake wrapped tightly around my vision. That color, that curl, pierced my eyes like a poison needle. Vanessa, the young woman who lived in the neighboring apartment, always dressed in tight skirts, with a bright laugh that sounded like silver bells. Her hair was exactly that color and exactly that curl. My stomach twisted violently, and acid rushed toward my throat. I bit my lower lip so hard that I tasted blood, barely suppressing the nausea rising inside me. The harsh ceiling light illuminated his face and revealed something beneath his collar. Close to his collarbone, a bright red mark. It was not blood. It was lipstick. The edges were blurred, as though someone had rubbed it against the fabric. It looked like a crushed rose petal. Its shape and location silently told a story of intimacy I did not want to believe. "Claire," he muttered drunkenly, finally lifting his face. His normally handsome and refined features were flushed from alcohol, and his unfocused eyes struggled to find me. He tried to straighten himself, but his body swayed uncontrollably as he instinctively reached toward me for support. I did not move. My body was rigid like weathered stone, while my heart hammered wildly inside my chest. Blood seemed to rush to my head before suddenly draining away, leaving only cold numbness. His hand missed me and hung awkwardly in the air. Then irritation flashed across his face. He narrowed his eyes and tried to focus on me. "Why are you just standing there?" he muttered with a thick, alcohol-soaked voice. "You are like a piece of wood. You have no sense at all." His eyes swept over the sofa, the useless hot water bottle in my arms, and finally the faded cotton pajamas I was wearing. The contempt in his eyes was almost impossible to hide. He gave a mocking laugh that cut through the rainy night. "Look at you. You are so lifeless." He shook his head as though remembering something both amusing and beneath him. "Vanessa," he said, his tongue stumbling over the name. "You could never learn even a little of what makes her so interesting. You have none of it." Every word felt like a red-hot brand pressed against my skin. Vanessa's name coming from his alcohol-stained lips, wrapped in affection and comparison, became the final blow. I drew in a sharp breath. The cold air burned my lungs. My fingernails dug deeply into my palms, and that tiny pain strangely pushed back the nausea in my throat. I forced myself to remain calm and slowly stood up. My movements were stiff, like a machine that had rusted solid. I walked toward him until I was close enough to smell the sweet perfume, sweat, smoke, and alcohol clinging to his body. He did not look at me. His eyes wandered as if he were still trapped inside the world created by his drunken arrogance. I reached out. My fingertips were so cold, they were almost numb. I touched the red stain beneath his collar. The damp fabric brushed against my fingers, and the mark seemed to grow larger before my eyes, like a drop of dried blood. I did not question him. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply wiped the stain again and again with my fingertip, mechanically rubbing the fabric. The red mark stubbornly spread across the shirt, becoming lighter in color, but larger in size, turning into a blurred stain just like the image of him collapsing inside my heart. He finally noticed what I was doing. His drunken eyes glanced at the place I was wiping, and he frowned impatiently. Then he suddenly knocked my hand away as if swatting an annoying insect. "Get away from me, Dot. Do not touch me." His voice was low and angry, and his body staggered from the force of his movement. "Stop pretending to be innocent." His hand struck my wrist hard. My wrist hit the sharp corner of the shoe cabinet, and a stabbing pain shot through my arm. I stumbled backward and pressed my back against the cold wall. I clenched my teeth and refused to let out a sound. I simply raised my eyes and looked through the pale light at the man standing before me. Someone both familiar and completely foreign. Ethan. My husband. At that moment, he looked like a trapped animal completely tamed by alcohol and desire. Violent and ugly. He did not look at me again. After pushing me away, I might as well have become invisible. He irritably pulled at his tie, muttered something incomprehensible, and staggered toward the bedroom. His heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Every step felt as though it were crushing what remained of my already shattered heart. The living room was left with only me and the endless storm outside. The cold walls slowly drained the remaining warmth from my body through my thin pajamas. The pain in my wrist began as a sharp sting, then slowly became numb and dull, spreading deep into the bone. But compared with the wound inside my heart, the physical pain was nothing. I leaned against the wall as my body slowly slid downward. Eventually, I collapsed onto the cold, hard floor. The entryway light switched off after hearing his footsteps disappear. Darkness and silence immediately wrapped around me. Outside, the rain continued pounding against the glass without mercy. My fingertips still remembered the damp texture of his shirt and the slippery feeling of the lipstick stain after I had smeared it. I stared at my fingers even though I could see nothing in the darkness. Yet the feeling of contamination was painfully clear. My stomach twisted again. This time I could not hold it back. I bent over and dry heaved, but nothing came out except bitter bile burning my throat. Vanessa, that strand of dark chestnut hair, that sweet perfume. His drunken words. You could never learn even a little of what makes Vanessa so charming. Every image and every word became a poisoned shard of ice, stabbing repeatedly into the most fragile part of my mind. Was I hurt? I was hurt to the bone. Did I hate him? My hatred spread like wildfire. But what remained after everything settled was a coldness and silence so deep that I could barely breathe. Tears finally burst from my eyes and rolled hotly down my cold cheeks. I made no sound. I simply cried silently, curling into myself in the darkness like a broken doll abandoned in a storm. My shoulders trembled uncontrollably, and I bit my lower lip until I tasted blood again. So this was how completely a heart could break. So this was what it felt like to be pushed over a cliff by the person you trusted. and depended on most. I did not know how long I sat there. Eventually, my legs became numb, and the rain outside weakened into a soft drizzle. My tears finally dried, leaving only raw pain and an empty calm. I used the wall to pull myself slowly to my feet. My legs felt as heavy as lead. I did not turn on the lights. Using the faint glow from the city outside, I walked silently into the study like a ghost. The computer screen cast a pale glow across my colorless face. I opened an encrypted folder containing things from years ago. Our marriage certificate, the property documents, several notes he had written casually, a few photographs of us together. In those photographs, he had his arm around me and wore a bright smile. His eyes were clear. Back then, there had been light in the way he looked at me. How ironic. I opened a new document. The cursor blinked on the empty screen, like a cold eye waiting to consume everything. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. They were cold and stiff. I began typing one letter at a time, slowly and firmly. This was not a confession. It was not a diary. It was a record. I recorded the time and location. I recorded the color and position of the strand of hair I had found. I recorded the shape of the lipstick stain on his collar. I recorded every word he had said, including the sentence that had shattered everything. You could never learn even a little of what makes Vanessa so charming. Evidence. I needed evidence. Cold, solid evidence that could not be denied. After typing the final line, I saved the document and encrypted it. I leaned back in my chair and closed my aching eyes. In the darkness, a thought slipped into my mind like a poisonous snake. Ethan, you said I had no charm. You said I could never compare with Vanessa. Fine, very well. A faint, cold smile slowly appeared at the corner of my lips. Under the pale blue glow of the computer screen, it looked strange and almost sinister. Then let me show you what a woman you called a piece of wood can learn when she is pushed to the edge. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of sharp light across the desk. Dust drifted silently through the beams. I sat in front of the computer, staring at the dull quarterly reports. Rows of numbers crawled across the screen like irritating ants. My fingers mechanically scrolled the mouse, but my mind had already drifted toward the closed door of the study next door. It belonged to Ethan. The door opened. Ethan walked out with freshly washed damp hair and a neatly pressed shirt, once again looking like the polished professional everyone knew. Only a trace of exhaustion remained beneath his eyes, evidence of the alcohol and indulgence from the night before. He walked straight into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. I put down the mouse and stood up. My movements were deliberately gentle. I forced a soft smile onto my face and walked toward him. Good morning, I said softly, with a hint of deliberate sweetness. Let me take that. Did you sleep well last night? You look a little tired. He paused. His brows tightened almost imperceptibly. The instinctive irritation of someone who had been disturbed. His eyes moved toward my hand, then settled on my face. His gaze was cold, like a frozen lake in winter. There was no emotion in it, only deep exhaustion. Yeah, he answered casually. He moved away from my hand and drank a large mouthful of water. Then he set down the glass. Do not wait for me for dinner tonight. The project team is having dinner together. Another dinner. My heart was pricked by a needle. The sharp pain disappeared almost immediately, leaving only numb coldness. My smile stiffened, but I forced myself to keep it in place. I see. Then do not drink too much. He did not even wait for me to finish. He turned toward the entryway and picked up his briefcase. He opened the door and left. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the empty living room. It felt like another blow against my ears. The door had shut him away, but it had also shut away the last trace of my forced smile. The smile disappeared instantly. Only an ashen coldness remained. I stood there like an abandoned statue. After a long while, I slowly walked toward the bedroom wardrobe. At the very bottom of the wardrobe was an ordinary paper bag. I pulled it out and opened it with stiff fingers. Inside was a neatly folded piece of clothing. I shook it open, a shocking flash of crimson. The fabric was cheap synthetic material, slippery yet rough against the skin. It was a vulgar deep V nightgown with thin straps and a neckline so low it seemed almost ridiculous. Cheap black lace was stitched unevenly around the edges. The entire thing smelled strongly of inexpensive chemical dye. So this was Charm. Was this what had made Vanessa so irresistible to him? My stomach twisted. I forced myself to put the crimson garment on. The cold, slippery fabric touched my skin and immediately raised goosebumps across my body. The reflection in the mirror looked frighteningly unfamiliar. My pale, exhausted face looked absurd against the exaggerated crimson outfit. I looked like a terrible imitation of someone meant to be laughed at. The exposed skin across my chest looked painfully vulnerable under the harsh light. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, there was no shame or anger left in my reflection, only a nearly ruthless calm. This ridiculous outfit was nothing more than a prop to measure how deep the abyss really was, a catalyst for accelerating his destruction. Time passed slowly in the suffocating silence. Outside, the sky gradually darkened and the city lights came alive one after another. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened. Ethan walked in smelling faintly of sweat and alcohol. "Good morning," I said softly, with a hint of deliberate sweetness. "Let me take that. Did you sleep well last night? You look a little tired." He paused. His brows tightened almost imperceptibly. The instinctive irritation of someone who had been disturbed. His eyes moved toward my hand, then settled on my face. His gaze was cold, like a frozen lake in winter. There was no emotion in it, only deep exhaustion. "Yeah," he answered casually. He moved away from my hand and drank a large mouthful of water. Then he set down the glass.
Cannot wait for me for dinner tonight.
"The project team is having dinner together. Another dinner." My heart was pricked by a needle. The sharp pain disappeared almost immediately, leaving only numb coldness. My smile stiffened, but I forced myself to keep it in place. "I see. Then do not drink too much." He did not even wait for me to finish. He turned toward the entryway and picked up his briefcase. He opened the door and left. The door slammed shut, and the sound echoed through the empty living room. It felt like another blow against my ears. The door had shut him away, but it had also shut away the last trace of my forced smile. The smile disappeared instantly. Only an ashen coldness remained. I stood there like an abandoned statue. After a long while, I slowly walked toward the bedroom wardrobe. At the very bottom of the wardrobe was an ordinary paper bag. I pulled it out and opened it with stiff fingers. Inside was a neatly folded piece of clothing. I shook it open, a shocking flash of crimson. The fabric was cheap synthetic material, slippery yet rough against the skin. It was a vulgar deep V nightgown with thin straps and a neckline so low it seemed almost ridiculous. Cheap black lace was stitched unevenly around the edges. The entire thing smelled strongly of inexpensive chemical dye. So this was Charm. Was this what had made Vanessa so irresistible to him? My stomach twisted. I forced myself to put the crimson garment on. The cold, slippery fabric touched my skin and immediately raised goosebumps across my body. The reflection in the mirror looked frighteningly unfamiliar. My pale, exhausted face looked absurd against the exaggerated crimson outfit. I looked like a terrible imitation of someone meant to be laughed at. The exposed skin across my chest looked painfully vulnerable under the harsh light. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them again, there was no shame or anger left in my reflection, only a nearly ruthless calm. This ridiculous outfit was nothing more than a prop to measure how deep the abyss really was. a catalyst for accelerating his destruction. Time passed slowly in the suffocating silence. Outside, the sky gradually darkened and the city lights came alive one after another. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of a key turning in the lock. The door opened. Ethan walked in smelling faintly of sweat and alcohol. He seemed to be in a good mood and was even humming an off-key tune. He casually tossed his keys onto the entryway cabinet. Then he looked up. His footsteps suddenly stopped. His humming ceased. Only one floor lamp beside the sofa was on, leaving the living room wrapped in dim, ambiguous light. I stood at the edge of the yellow glow, wearing the shocking crimson lace nightgown. The light outlined my figure beneath the fabric and illuminated the expression I had tried so hard to imitate. A stiff imitation of what he considered charm. I could feel his eyes scanning me from head to toe like searchlights. There was no warmth in his gaze. No surprise. No desire. Not even contempt. Only pure, undisguised disgust. It felt as though he were looking at something filthy and unpleasant. The air seemed to freeze. Time stretched and twisted. Every second felt like a century. Finally, he curled his lips into a faint sneer. The sound scraped across my ears like a cold blade. He shook his head with an expression of disbelief and disgust. "Claire, you are becoming more and more unbearable." His eyes stopped briefly on the cheap lace across my chest. He looked at it as though it were a pile of garbage waiting to be removed. Then he turned his face away in disgust, as though looking at me for another second would dirty his eyes. He walked straight past me toward the bathroom. Before closing the door, he threw one final insult over his shoulder. "You are just a pathetic imitation." The bathroom door slammed shut. Water immediately began rushing inside. I stood there. The crimson nightgown felt like a burning flame against my skin. It burned not only my body, but the last remaining pieces of my dignity. The ridiculous woman in the mirror had already lost every trace of forced charm. All that remained was a pale face and a bottomless emptiness in my eyes. A pathetic imitation, unbearable. Every word felt like a poisoned needle piercing a heart already covered in wounds. Yet this time, the expected pain never came. Instead, a strange cold calm slowly flooded over me like an undercurrent in the deep sea. "Good, Ethan. Your reaction was exactly what I expected. Exactly what I needed." I slowly raised my hand and touched the cheap lace over my chest. It felt slippery and worthless. Looking into the mirror, I slowly pulled the corners of my lips into a silent, cold smile. The living room was dim. The television screen glowed faintly, playing another ordinary family drama. The volume was low, like meaningless noise in the background. I sat curled up in the armchair, holding a glass of water that had long since gone cold. My eyes were empty as I watched the shifting light on the screen. Then the silence was broken by the sudden vibration of my phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up. A name appeared. Vanessa. My fingers curled almost imperceptibly. I stared at the name for several seconds before finally answering. "Hello." My voice was soft, with just the right amount of sleepy hoarseness and exhaustion. "Claire." Vanessa's bright voice came through the phone with deliberate familiarity. "Are you busy? I hope I am not bothering you." "No, I am at home." I looked at the empty sofa across from me. That had once been Ethan's favorite place to sit. "Oh, good." Vanessa's voice immediately became lighter. "Claire, I am honestly a little embarrassed to ask. The faucet in my bathroom is leaking again. It is driving me crazy. I have called the property manager so many times, but nobody will come fix it. Ethan seems pretty good with this kind of thing. He mentioned it once before. Do you think?" Her voice became slightly playful before she deliberately paused. The intention behind her words was obvious. My fingers tightened around the phone until my knuckles turned white. Inside, I felt nothing but ice. Yet I kept my expression calm and even added a trace of understanding to my voice. I see. A leaking faucet really is annoying. Ethan has fixed the pipes at home before. I paused as though hesitating. But I think he has a dinner engagement tonight. I am not sure when he will be back. I could ask him for you. Really. He has a dinner engagement. Vanessa sounded disappointed for an instant before quickly becoming understanding. Then never mind. I do not want to bother Ethan. I will wait for the property manager. Thank you, Claire. You are welcome. My voice remained gentle. Neighbors should help each other. After the call ended, the screen went dark. The living room fell back into darkness and silence. I stared at the black screen of my phone like it was a bottomless trap. The corner of my mouth slowly lifted into a cold smile. Help. Of course, I would help. I opened Ethan's chat and began typing. Every word was carefully chosen. My tone was calm and emotionless, like a dutiful messenger simply passing along a neighbor's request. Vanessa just called. She said the faucet in her bathroom is leaking badly, and the property manager still has not come to fix it. She knows you are good at this kind of thing and wanted to know if you had time to stop by. I told her you might have a dinner engagement tonight and that she should not bother you. She sounded pretty disappointed. I added a small helpless emoji. The message was sent. I put down my phone and picked up the glass of cold water again. I took a sip. The cold water slid down my throat and settled like ice in my stomach. I knew exactly what kind of ripple this message would create. Ethan loved playing the savior. He enjoyed being admired and needed by women. Vanessa's carefully timed request for help and her deliberate disappointment were the perfect catalyst. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, I heard a key turning rapidly in the lock. Ethan was back, much earlier than usual. His face held a strange mixture of irritation and hidden excitement. His suit jacket hung casually over his arm, and his tie had been loosened. He did not even look at me. He walked straight into the center of the living room. His eyes swept over the television and then over my conservative home clothes. His brows tightened with his usual criticism and impatience. That faucet at Vanessa's place. He spoke as though explaining himself, or perhaps announcing an important decision. It is leaking badly. The property manager is completely useless. She is a woman living alone. She cannot deal with that kind of thing. He paused, searching for a more respectable reason. We are neighbors. We see each other all the time. I should go help her. His excuse sounded noble. His tone made it seem perfectly natural, as though he had rushed home tonight solely because of the noble spirit of neighborly assistance. I looked up and watched him calmly. His eyes shifted nervously, and he could not hold my gaze for long. You should. I nodded with no emotion in my voice. You had better go before she has to wait too long. The tools are in the storage cabinet on the balcony. My reaction clearly surprised him. He froze for a moment. Perhaps he had prepared himself for questions or accusations, but instead his words landed against nothing. He muttered a vague response and quickly walked toward the balcony. His movements carried a hint of urgency, almost as though he could not wait to escape. Soon he came back carrying a toolbox. He passed me again and headed straight for the door. He opened it. He closed it. The soft click left me completely alone in the apartment. The television continued playing meaningless background noise. I sat quietly and stared at the closed door. After a few seconds, I stood up and walked to the window. I pulled the heavy curtains apart just enough to see outside. Under the dim street lights below, Ethan's figure was clearly visible. He carried the toolbox with light, almost excited steps. His destination was obvious, the entrance to Vanessa's building. He quickly disappeared inside. The night was heavy and dark. I let the curtain fall and returned to the center of the living room. An enormous emptiness suddenly swallowed the entire space. The television light flickered across my face. Slowly, I raised my hand and covered my face. My shoulders began to tremble. At first, it was barely noticeable, like leaves shivering in an autumn wind. Then the trembling grew stronger until my entire body shook violently. Suppressed. Broken sobs finally escaped my throat and slipped through my fingers into the silent room. This was not ordinary crying. It was the desperate wail of someone whose last hope had been crushed. Tears poured down my face, burning my cheeks before falling from my cold fingers onto the floor. Enough. It was truly enough. This carefully arranged stage, this disgusting performance, this endless humiliation that had cut me slowly like a dull blade. It was time for the curtain to fall. I suddenly lifted my head. Tears covered my face, but there was no sadness left in my eyes. Only a cold determination washed clean by tears. I looked like a trapped animal finally forced to the edge of a cliff, finally revealing its last set of claws. Still trembling, I reached for the phone on the coffee table. The screen was blurred by tears. I wiped my face and desperately searched through my contacts. I found it, the number labeled Mother. I stared at the name. My finger hovered over the call button, trembling violently from the force of my emotions. My chest rose and fell rapidly. Every breath came with a broken tremor. Those few seconds felt like an entire century. Then I pressed the button with all my strength. The phone rang. Each monotonous tone struck against my already breaking nerves. Finally, the call was answered. Margaret's familiar voice came through, distant as usual. Hello. Claire. Mom. My voice broke through immediately. It was hoarse and filled with uncontrollable sobs. Mom. Please control Ethan. I cannot take this anymore. My words were cut apart by a massive sob. There was silence on the other end. Margaret's voice immediately tightened. What happened? What is wrong? What did Ethan do? Tell me slowly. It is Vanessa. I could barely force her name out. Ethan went to her place again. He said he was fixing the pipes. But how many times has this happened now? My sobs became so violent that I could barely continue. What? That woman again. Margaret's voice rose sharply with anger. Fixing pipes. In the middle of the night. What kind of pipe needs fixing at this hour? That bastard. Mom. I interrupted her, furious shouting. My voice suddenly became sharper and more desperate. Then I delivered the carefully prepared words that would ignite everything. Vanessa is pregnant again. It is Ethan's. I heard them talking about it on the phone. The final words came out almost as a scream, filled with the desperation of someone ready to destroy everything. Silence, complete silence. Time seemed to stop. Several seconds later, I heard Margaret suck in a sharp breath. Then came the sound of something being smashed against the floor. Her voice exploded with rage. That bastard! That damn bastard! How dare he? The call ended abruptly. Only the rapid, busy tone remained. The sound seemed painfully loud in the silent living room. I held the phone while tears continued running down my face. My body still trembled slightly from the performance I had just given. But deep inside my eyes, the overwhelming pain and despair quickly receded like a retreating tide. What remained was cold and hard. I slowly lowered the phone. The call history still glowed on the screen. Outside, the night was as dark as ink, pressing heavily over the city. A storm that had been building for a long time had finally been given a spark. It was Ethan's old identification photo, taken several years earlier. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his hair neatly styled, and a confident smile spread across his face. Yet now the photograph appeared beside the cold words, "Criminal suspect," beneath the image. A headline read that the former financial manager had been taken into criminal custody and that the investigation was ongoing. The anchor continued reporting details of the case and reminding viewers to remain alert. I watched the screen calmly. I looked at the face that had once been so familiar, but now seemed separated from me by another lifetime. Embezzlement, more than 2 million yuan. Luxury spending. An inappropriate relationship. Every word corresponded perfectly with the evidence. I had anonymously sent to his company's audit department and the police financial crimes unit. Bank records scanned copies of forged contracts, high-resolution screenshots of his spending at luxury hotels and designer stores with Vanessa. The evidence was overwhelming. On the screen, Ethan's confident photograph was frozen and enlarged. Then, as the news changed, it quickly shrank into a small corner of the screen before disappearing completely. The broadcast moved on to another piece of news. The office fell silent. Only the steam rising from my coffee drifted slowly through the sunlight. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside again. My eyes settled on the familiar window of Vanessa's apartment, glowing with warm and intimate light. The corner of my mouth slowly curved upward into a cold and sharp smile. The show was about to begin. The peaceful morning in the apartment complex was completely shattered. A woman's furious screaming suddenly exploded through the thin window glass. Like a blaring emergency siren, the voice was unmistakable, angry, shrill, and hysterical with betrayal. It was Margaret. She had come. I suddenly sat upright in bed. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was not fear. It was a cold excitement. The feeling that everything had finally reached its inevitable conclusion. I grabbed a coat and threw it over my robe. Barefoot, I rushed silently toward the living room window. Downstairs, a small crowd of awakened neighbors had gathered. They stood in pajamas, still half asleep, whispering and pointing with shocked expressions. Everyone was staring at the entrance of the neighboring building. Margaret stood before the locked security door like an enraged lioness. Her gray hair was disheveled, and she was still wearing the clothes she had slept in. Two strong middle-aged men stood behind her, clearly relatives or people she had called for help. "Vanessa, are you shameless little homewrecker? Get out here!" Margaret's voice cracked with rage as it echoed through the morning air. "You seduced my son. You are carrying a child from my family. Open this door. If you have the courage, open it." She kicked the heavy security door again and again. Each impact shook the building. "You are not opening it. Fine. Let us see how long you can hide." Margaret turned toward the two men behind her. "Break it down. Break the door open. I will take responsibility." The two men immediately stepped forward. One pulled a heavy wrench from his tool bag, swung it with all his strength, and slammed it against the lock. The violent crash of metal against metal caused the onlookers downstairs to gasp. Panic could be heard from inside the apartment. The wrench was raised for another strike. Just before it came down, the battered security door finally creaked open. Time seemed to freeze. The first thing visible through the opening was the pale, terrified face of a young woman. Vanessa, all her hair was disheveled. She wore only a thin silk robe, its collar hanging crookedly around her neck. She stood barefoot on the floor. But after everyone looked at her frightened face, their attention was immediately drawn to the tall figure behind her, trying to retreat toward the bedroom. Ethan. He had obviously been dragged from bed by the commotion. He had not even had time to dress properly. He was wearing something, but that something was crimson. Cheap synthetic fabric, thin straps, a deep neckline, and uneven black lace around the edges. It was the same cheap nightgown I had deliberately bought. The same nightgown he had once called disgusting and pathetic. That shocking crimson fabric and vulgar lace now hung awkwardly from the body of a grown man. The straps pressed against his broad shoulders, while the deep neckline fell open to reveal his sweat-dampened chest. The scene was so bizarre and absurd that the entire world seemed to fall silent. The voices downstairs stopped. Margaret stopped shouting. Even the two men holding the wrench froze. Countless eyes locked onto Ethan and the ridiculous crimson nightgown covering him. The color drained from Ethan's face when he saw the crowd outside. Then the blood rushed back into his face in a violent wave. Shame and fury made his entire body tremble. He instinctively tried to cover the nightgown with his hands, but the attempt only made him look more helpless. "Mom. What are you doing?" His voice was twisted by humiliation and anger as he tried to hide his embarrassment behind rage. "What am I doing?" Margaret screamed, her eyes locked onto the crimson nightgown. Her finger trembled with anger and disbelief. "Ethan, you shameless bastard. Look at yourself. What on earth are you wearing? Do you have no dignity? You have humiliated this entire family." She was nearly breathless with rage. Then she turned toward Vanessa, who stood trembling in terror. "And you shameless girl, you actually let him wear something like this. What exactly are you trying to do?" Vanessa burst into tears as Margaret pointed at her. No comma ma single quotes am. I did not. It was Ethan." She looked desperately toward him for help. "Shut up." Ethan interrupted her violently. The veins on his forehead stood out as humiliation consumed him. At that moment, he wanted nothing more than to disappear. He shoved Vanessa out of the doorway with such force that she stumbled into the frame and cried out in pain. He did not even look at her. He was like a trapped animal desperate to escape. "Get out. All of you get out." He tried to force the broken door shut and block out the countless eyes that were humiliating him. "Get out. I will make you get out." Margaret had completely lost control. The dignity she had spent her entire life protecting, the shock of seeing her son in that crimson nightgown, and the news that Vanessa was pregnant, whether true or not, had destroyed her reason. She rushed forward and grabbed the collar of the crimson nightgown with both hands. The fabric suddenly tore with a sharp ripping sound. Everyone stared in shock. The cheap nightgown could not survive her furious grip. The fragile lace and synthetic fabric ripped apart. The tear ran from the neckline down toward the waist. Pieces of crimson fabric hung from Ethan's body like a shredded flag. Most of his chest and shoulder were exposed to the cold morning air and the countless staring eyes. He froze. He looked like a statue suddenly turned to stone. The furious color drained from his face, leaving him deathly pale. His lips trembled. His eyes became empty. The overwhelming humiliation crashed over him like a tidal wave and completely broke him. Time seemed to stop. The crowd downstairs fell into complete silence. Even breathing could be heard. Everyone had been stunned by the scene. Vanessa covered her mouth and sobbed quietly. The two men awkwardly turned their faces away. Only Margaret continued holding the torn pieces of crimson fabric. Her chest rose and fell violently as she looked at her son standing there, stripped of every trace of dignity. Her anger slowly transformed into a cold and devastating sorrow. She opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something. In the end, only a wounded, desperate sob escaped her. "What have we done?" She released the torn fabric. The crimson scraps fell helplessly from her hands. She stumbled backward, as though all the strength had been drained from her body. Tears streamed down her face. I stood behind the curtain upstairs, my fingers tightly gripping the cold fabric. The chaos below, Ethan's collapse, Margaret's despair, and the silent contempt of the neighbors all entered my cold eyes. I felt no satisfaction, no pity, only a stillness like dead water. The torn crimson fabric was a symbol of Ethan's shattered life and ruined dignity. I slowly released the curtain and turned away. The spectacle I had directed no longer had anything to do with me. It was time to clean up the aftermath. Sunlight poured generously through the spotless floor to ceiling windows, filling the entire room. The faint smell of fresh renovation materials lingered in the air, mixed with the warm scent of dust touched by sunlight. The walls were painted a soft, warm beige. Light gray matte tiles covered the floor. Several healthy fiddle leaf figs and monstera plants added life to the new space. This was my new beginning. Claire Psychological Counseling Studio. A simple white sign hung outside the door, glowing softly in the sunlight. I sat behind a wide and comfortable desk with a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. Sunlight fell across an open document beside my hand. It was the first draft of my new studio's brochure. The design was simple and professional. A brand new television hung on the wall opposite my desk. The screen was playing the midday news. A composed female anchor spoke in a clear and steady voice. Local police have recently uncovered an embezzlement case involving a financial manager at a technology company. The suspect, Ethan Carter, allegedly used his position to falsify project contracts and inflate reimbursement claims over a period of approximately 18 months. The total amount of company funds allegedly misappropriated exceeded to million yuan. Investigators believe a significant portion of the money was used for personal luxury spending and inappropriate relationships. A photograph appeared on the screen,